I'm delighted to welcome today Mike Glauser, who is the professor at Utah University in Salt Lake City. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you very much, Elaine. I'm excited to be with you today.
Fabulous. Thank you for being here. So, Mike, you've written a book, haven't you?
I've just written a book. It was released in June, and I'm very excited about it. I've been working on it for a number of years.
Tell us the title and what led you to create the title and something about the book.
So the book's called One People, One Planet, and the subtitle is 6 Universal Truths for Being Happy Together. And I guess what motivated this book is I've been very concerned about what I call the epidemic of despair in the world, particularly in the United States. I'm not sure if it's the same in the UK and other countries, but here in the United States at the college level, which I teach, about 40% of our students say they're so depressed they can't do their schoolwork a lot of the days during the semester, and 60% say they're lonely. At the high school level now, we have about 20% of the students say that they've thought about or contemplated suicide, and about half of them say that they feel persistently sad. And I just read some of the latest statistics from the National Institute of Mental Health, and about 33% of the adult population is suffering from some kind of anxiety or depression. And as you know, in your field, that emotional health is strongly related to physical health. And so we're kind of seeing this epidemic of despair and also the epidemic of incivility. A lot of the research shows that we're not interacting with our neighbors as much. We don't trust our neighbors. We're not as friendly. We're kind of isolated, and human beings don't do well in isolation. And so that's, I think, why we're seeing this kind of despair and anxiety, depression, and incivility around the world. And so I wanted to address those issues in this book.
The last 2 years worth of nonsense hasn't helped at all. It's made an unstable situation even more rocky, hasn't it?
Yeah, this new, social media world that we're more connected than ever before, but we're also more isolated because those relationships are rather superficial. We're not meeting in person. We're not talking face to face. We're not going out to lunch as much. We're not balancing each other's thoughts. And then COVID obviously made that a lot worse.
What can we do about it, Mike?
Well, that's what I've been trying to do here. I wanted to study credible literature throughout the world and see if we've been taught some basic principles about personal happiness and civility in our communities that has also been vetted by, modern day research. And so I looked at 3 sources of knowledge. I first went to some of the writings of the great religious founders. So the largest religions in the world, so Christianity and Islam and Buddhism and Hinduism, and I looked at their original writings, the original manuscripts, not all the breakaway groups that compete with each other or contend with each other, but what did the founders say about happiness and civility? And I marked all of those verses in those ancient texts about those topics and compared and contrasted them. And then the second source of knowledge, I went to some of our great philosophers, renowned philosophers from Asia and Greek and Rome and the European philosophers, and found much the same teachings about personal happiness and community building, community civility. And then since a lot of people don't, favor religion or philosophy, I thought, what does the science say? And I looked at the last 20 years of research in positive psychology around the world. And there's thousands of studies that vet these same principles that were taught thousands of years ago, almost 4,000 and 5,000 years ago. And so those are the 6 universal truths for being happy together. And being happy together is really an important part of this book. If you look at, books on happiness, and there's a lot of them and they're great, but when they list what we're supposed to do to be happy, the prescriptions are kind of insular. It's like, set goals in your life and do something that's important each day and get control of your health. And all those things are great. But all these 3 sources I've looked at really show that the highest level of happiness comes in the context of relationships with other people. And so the book is really about principles that will help us to feel much happier personally and to have stronger, more civil communities, and they involve interacting with others.
Absolutely spot on. However, in this day and age, we're not encouraged to interact with others other than through the screens and the gaming and and our mobile computer phones and so on and so forth. And you mentioned earlier on about the high level of anxiety. So for people who are struggling with high levels of anxiety, how do they take the step to mix with other people? Because for a lot of people, it is the social anxiety that causes the problem, doesn't it? So
Yeah.
it's kind of, you're identifying the problem, but then the problem's going to be worse by trying to do the resolution. So how do we square that circle?
Well, the first principle, the first universal truth I talk about is, I call it give up the ego. And this is the one that we do on our own. We've used the term ego to mean someone is very proud, very self-righteous, self-centered, kind of maybe cocky. But the way it's used in the literature, the ego is the composite of all the self-perceptions we've developed of ourselves over the years, usually through messages from other people. So when we're young, we're told things that we're pretty, or we're not pretty, or we're smart, or we're musical, or we're not athletic, or we are, or we're tall, or too thick, or too thin. And we develop these self-perceptions that are pretty well fixed in our minds by the time we're 10, 12 years old. And they set bounds and limitations on who we are. And all of this literature that I've reviewed talks about, the two selves. One is this fabricated ego or self concept, and the other one is the true human potential of individuals. And so if we can realize that these illusions we have of ourselves are not real, and that we can do things beyond what we think about ourselves, it's very freeing. The problem with this ego and focus on ourselves is that it's like we're on a claustrophobic treadmill of self-centeredness. It's like we're in the movie, we're the star of a movie, and we're in the movie. And that's what brings a lot of anxiety, is this constant focus on me, 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 me. And so if we can realize, hey, we're all works in progress. We have these illusions of self that can be changed. And I recommend how I have some very grounded concepts for how to change those. And then it kind of relieves a little bit of that anxiety, because we go out into the world looking for how we can contribute and that we have potential to grow and change, rather than thinking about what everyone is thinking about us, which is one of the main roots of social anxiety. Is we're worried about how we're perceived and coming across in the world.
The comparison thing is huge now, isn't it? Because again, with the young people on the social media, you have to be stick thin, have perfect makeup, perfect suits for the men, perfect hairstyles, trimmed beards, the whole bit. And yet a lot of people tend to use these outside things to cover up their own insecurities and their own lack of confidence and self-esteem and so on. So it's really difficult, I think, in today's society to get the balance right between having an ego that's too kind of destructive or too small at the same time. It's a bit of a dichotomy, isn't it?
Yeah, and to make the book interesting and to make it believable, I've used stories of people, pretty amazing people that have made real changes in their self-perceptions. And so one of the stories is about an ex-convict that spent 20 years in prison in Los Angeles, and how he grew up believing he was this tough gangster type guy, and he became the leader of losers, as he says. And he started stealing and robbing and committing crimes and selling drugs and running guns. And when he was in prison, he was the leader of the white skinhead gang. He says he held the keys to the yard, which means he was the one everyone followed. And when he finally got out, he was allowed to go to a rehabilitation program rather than complete his life. It's almost a life sentence that he had. And he started realizing that's not really who he was, that he learned how he evolved into that. And that he remembers when he was younger, he was a decent person, that he liked people and he liked doing good. So he formed an organization. It's called the Other Side Academy, where he helps, convicts that are released from prison early into his program completely redefine who they are and deal with these past perceptions. And the way that they do it, it's called act as if. And so they say, well, what would a decent person do? And they start acting like they're decent. And what would an honest person do? And they start acting honest. And eventually, over time, they become what they strive to become. Very decent, very happy people, very successful in business, back out in the world as new individuals.
That's a wonderful story. And that's a true story, I presume,
yeah.
the way you've told it, yeah.
Yeah, he did it 20 years in prison and was out for a few months, and then was convicted, given a 29-year sentence. So he would have spent his entire life in prison. And now he's one of the most decent, honest, wonderful, compassionate people that I know. And he's helping hundreds of others become that way as well. But they have to go and deal with this perception they've developed of who they are and how it developed and how they might change that. And really in the book, I give some suggestions. You have to start doing things outside of your comfort zone. So you take a small step and go, wow. And then you get this positive feedback, and then you set a little bit bigger goal, and then you take another step. And before long, you create this upward loop of this upward spiral of feedback of success. And so that's the first concept in the book, is this dealing with this ego that we all have.
What's the second?
So the second one is, I think, fascinating. It's we develop perceptions of other people in the same way we develop perceptions of ourselves. So what happens is we see something very superficial about someone. We see their size, their looks, their color, their race, their ethnicity. We learn about their political affiliations. We learn what religion they are in. And because humans are complex, we don't know everything. So what we do is we fill in all the pieces. We basically construct a personality for someone based on some outward superficial characteristic. And then when we make these judgments, we put people into categories. And as we put people into categories, we're less inclined to interact. We don't interact with this group or that group. Mm-hmm. It's been interesting here in the United States. A survey showed that of the 78% of the members of the Democratic Party would not be friends with or affiliate with or date with anyone who liked Donald Trump. So they cut out half of the people in America. And we do that. And if we can lose these judgments and get over these judgments, then we have more people to interact with, more people to be friends with, more people to like. And the story I use in the book that is so powerful is a gentleman named R. Shea Cooper, who grew up in Chicago in the middle of the gangs. And he had to walk across 3 different gang territories to get to high school. He stepped over dead bodies. He saw blood in the streets. He was beat up. He had to make sure he wore the right colors and wore his hat the right way. And his high school was one of the most violent high schools in the United States at the time. And someone showed up, a couple showed up and said, we want to start a rowing team and get some of you in this boat rowing together. And, you know, they were not the least bit interested in putting rival gang members in a boat to row on a rowing team, but eventually they were convinced to do it. And he tells this marvelous story of how they realized that they had all been through trauma. They had all had hard times. They had all suffered, and that their perceptions of the other gangs were not due to any interaction they had had, but due to what they'd heard about these gangs. And as the more they talked, they realized they were more similar than they were different. And they became very best friends, having grown up in rival gangs. And the beautiful part of the story is that they thought, well, if it'll work with rival gangs, it'll probably work with the police department. So they went to the Chicago Police Department and got, you know, half a dozen white cops to come row in the boat with them. And they became best friends. They also realized they had a lot to offer, and they were more alike than they were different. And so his message, R. Shea Cooper's message, he's a real evangelist for not judging others and for peace, is that it's easy to hate from a distance. It's harder to hate up close. And we need to work together and do things together. And when we shed these biases, their group of friends grew dramatically. And so give up, you know, this tendency, this human tendency of judging constantly, and these biases that we've developed, which separates us as humans. That's the second concept.
It's very strong, isn't it? The perception we have of ourselves and other people, and the judgment. And then we hear, you know, our parents told us certain things, our friends have told us other things, social media tells us other things. So we're constantly bombarded with other people's stuff that we just absorb, don't we? And in the end, we get the whole lot mixed up. And it's no wonder, you know, so many people go off the rails these days. It's very sad. So yeah. Number 3 perception, number 3 point, what's that?
So the third one is very simple, and we all know it, but we don't always do it. It's to do good deeds daily, to think about others more than ourselves, and each day get up and say, if there's someone that might need me in any way, I'm willing to do that, and actually look out for those opportunities. So you might give up a seat on the bus. You might pay the toll for the car behind you. You might call an old friend. You might just smile at people at the grocery store. You might carry someone's groceries. If it's wintertime, you might shovel the neighbor's walks. And if we do something like that every day, that the research is just overwhelming, that the conclusion is when person A helps person B, person A gets better. So when we do good deeds, we're the one that enjoy these physiological chemical reactions in our brains that help our emotions and our physiology. And the research is just overwhelming, that if we can quit thinking of others and go out into the world looking for ways to create value, then we grow significantly emotionally and heal physically. And, I think the reason we learn that we have value, instead of thinking, oh, poor me, we're thinking, hey, I can contribute to people's lives and it makes a difference in their life. And that makes me very happy.
Yeah, we all need a purpose, don't we, at the end of the day? And even if it is just doing one deed a day, never mind all the other good points that you have in the book, if, just one good deed a day helps you feel good as an individual, as you said, that you grow, but then you also pass it on to the next person and they do the same, and so on and so on. It's a domino effect, isn't it?
It's so simple, and we know that, and we've heard this, but the thing I'm trying to do through my book and my workshops and my training programs is to get people to experiment with these concepts and actually try them and see what happens. And the beauty is that they work in real time. If you do any of these principles today, you'll be happier today.
Yeah,
Guaranteed.
absolutely.
I mean, they won't solve all your problems and life won't be perfect, but you'll be happier than you would be otherwise. And so you do them today and you're happier today, and you keep doing them over time, and then your life becomes better.
Absolutely. I remember the feeling when I was going over some bridges. I often used to go between England and Wales, and I'd often pay the toll for the car behind me. And just seeing in the mirror their expression, because obviously by the time they'd got through, I was gone, but you could see like the mannerisms and all the rest of it, and it's just such a lovely feeling. It lifts you. So we're doing a good deed, even if it's saying to somebody, oh, your hair looks pretty today, or I like your shirt that you're wearing, or something like that. Instantly the person rises to the compliment, and it makes everybody feel better.
Yeah, and I've got one of the great stories in the book that I love is a friend of mine, Richard Paul Evans, is a best-selling author, New York Times best-selling author. He sold 20 million copies of his books. And he tells the story of in his career when he started becoming so well known and he was traveling all over the world and speaking, his marriage started to unravel. They were apart more than they were together. And when they would get back together, there was constant fighting, and it got so bad that they just thought there's no way to save this. And that really disturbed him, because he always wanted to stay in love with his wife and stay married. And so he thought about it. And he said he got some real insights. And so one morning he woke up and said to his wife, Carrie, he said, hey, what can I do to make your day better today? And she said, what are you talking about? And he says, no, I want to do something kind for you to make your day better. So she said, okay, go clean the garage. So he went out and cleaned the garage. And the next day, what can I do to make your day better? And she said, go clean the kitchen. So he cleaned the kitchen. And he did that every day for a month. And she finally said, what's going on? Why are you doing this? And they had the most heartfelt conversation they'd had in years, that, how they both contributed to the crisis in the marriage. And then she started saying, Richard, what can I do for you? And they started just paying more attention. And he's got a beautiful article online, How Good Deeds Saved My Marriage. It's been reviewed by millions of people. And he allowed me to include that story in the book. And, that's very simple. We know these things, but we just don't always do them, but they do make a big difference.
Yeah, brilliant. Absolutely. Number 4.
So number 4 is a tough one. And probably a lot about this in your field, that when we harbor anger and hold grudges and we won't forgive people, it has a pretty serious impact on our emotions and our physiology. And so if we take offense easily, we're harboring and carrying this poison around with us. It's like we're drinking poison ourselves, but then we wait for the other person to die. The other person maybe could care less or not even know that we're angry. And so it's learning to forgive people, learning to give others for offenses that occur. And I found just a marvelous woman that's a role model to the world. Her name is Cy Snar, and her son, 18-year-old son, Zach, was shot and killed by a stranger one night. He was out on the lake with his friend, and someone walked up behind him and shot him and killed him. And Cy talks about how she became a shell of a person. She was depressed, she was suicidal, she was angry. This gentleman happened to be Hispanic, so she hated the Hispanic community, and she just developed this incredible anger. And after almost 20 years, the young boy that shot her son got life in prison without parole, and he finally wrote her a letter. And he told her that he was just a young, foolish kid, that he was depressed and suicidal himself, and he wanted to take his life, but he was afraid to do it. So he thought if he did something horrible, then he would have the strength to then take his own life. And he talked about how he suffered this entire time for what he did, and that he was sorry, and he took full responsibility and asked for her forgiveness. And she said it just kind of really touched her. So she wrote back, and then he wrote back, and then they started writing every week. And eventually they were signing the letters Love Cy, and he was writing Love George. And then they started talking on the phone with his phone call each week. And now they've met in the prison, and she has his family over for dinner and knows his mom. And she just has fallen in love with his family and forgiven this young man completely. And so in the book, she talks about the difference between the hatred that she felt and the love that she has been able to develop for someone that she only knows because he shot and killed her son. So that's pretty dramatic. And I think sometimes it's even harder to forgive people small things, but I quote a lot of research in the book about, one professor has done over 100 studies on forgiveness alone. And it makes a huge difference if we can let things pass and work and know that people are works in progress, and they can change, and I can change, and try not to hold on to those things. One last, quick story from Buddha in the Pali Canon. He said there's three kinds of people in the world. One group is like a line etched in stone, and the other group's like a line etched in the dirt, and the third group is like a line etched in water. And the line etched in water goes away very quickly, almost immediately, and the line etched in stone lasts a long time. And he says, what kind of person are you? And so the key is to not take offense in the first place, and realize that we're works in progress, and we don't always understand why someone has done something. And if we can let it go, we do it for us, for ourselves and our own health.
Absolutely spot on. I was strangled and left for dead some years ago, and I forgave the person who did that. It took me quite a while, mind you, but when I next met the person many years later, he was, very apologetic, and I said, oh, don't worry about it. I said, I forgave you years ago, not because you deserve it, but because I do. Not because you're worth it, but because I deserve it. And that's exactly what I tell people that I'm mentoring through on the health side of things, because as you alluded to, when you're retaining bitterness, anger, then you can't forgive. It's one of the questions I ask people: who do you need to forgive, including yourself? Because unless you release that emotional tension, you're not going to heal. You can eat the best diet, do the best things, take the exercise, do all the good stuff, but if you haven't got the emotional aspect in balance, then you're going to struggle. So yeah, absolutely. So that's your point 4. So we have 2 more.
So the next one is to share our possessions, share our good fortune in life, whether it's our concepts or our kindness or our material possessions. And there's really quite a bit of research here that shows that if we cling to material things, we're less happy than if we're willing to share what we have. And the research is so clear that we need a certain amount of money and well-being to take care of ourselves. But beyond that point, having more and more and more does not make us happy. In fact, it actually can make us kind of greedy, and we can become hoarders, and we can be fearful that we're going to lose what we have. And so I have some marvelous stories about people that have shared their possessions and what that's done for the people that are the receivers as well as the givers. So just learning not to be attached. I had an interesting experience. We've been remodeling our home, and we had to move all of our clothes out of the closets and everything out of our cupboards and move out basically. And when we started moving back in, we thought, we don't want to put all this stuff back in there. And I literally gave away 80% of my clothes to people that needed them, that had suits I hadn't worn for 10 years, and completely decluttered our house. And it's so enjoyable to walk into a clean house that's not cluttered, and the joy of having shared what we have with others. And so just letting go, basically, letting go of our attachment and being willing to share with people that might need the things that we have produces tremendous happiness, increases civility in organizations, and increases our emotional and physical health.
Absolutely. I identify with that. I live in Portugal now, and I came here in my car literally with a handful of possessions, and I downgraded eventually from a 6-bedroom designer beautiful house. And you can only drive one car, you can only use one bathroom, you can only sleep in one bed. Why do we have all these things where we spend half our life striving for things, but when we get them, that's when we have the maturity, the wisdom to realize actually we don't need them, because potentially for some people they're a liability at that point. So yeah, traveling light, I concur with that most definitely. So what's the final one, Mike?
So the last one is called Care for Our Needy. This is a little different than doing good deeds. In every community, we have people that have long-term needs. Maybe they've lost a job. Maybe they're suffering from a physical illness or a mental illness. They've been through a divorce. They need mentors. They need someone to help them and take their hand and help them pull through that experience. And if each one of us would find someone like that in our communities are far better off. And we find that the people that receive this aid and this support and this assistance become great givers themselves. They then want to help people in need. I do a lot of work around the world in poverty alleviation in Africa and in Asia, and particularly in the Philippines. And we see these people that are living in poverty. We help build small businesses, and they double or triple their household income. And the first thing they start doing is helping other people that have problems. And they're just so generous. And we all have needs, and we will be needy at times. And so to give and take and help those that are struggling and suffering really benefits us and benefits our community. We all benefit because we're all connected. And so there's some great stories about that in the book as well.
Brilliant. So that comes back to the title of the book, One People, One Planet.
Yes.
Have I got that right?
That's right. You got it.
Brilliant. And how do people get hold of the book, Mike?
So the book is for sale on all the retail sites, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and we have a website, onepeopleoneplanet.com. We have the book is there, and we have many videos of these people I've just talked about. And we have a training program. We actually have a high school course and a university course, and so they can learn a lot more about our movement. The book is just a part of what we're trying to do, and so it's onepeopleoneplanet.com.
Fabulous, absolutely brilliant. I had no idea it was such a big, well, it's a movement, isn't it? It's not just a book, it's a whole movement. Sounds wonderful.
That's our goal, is to spread sound concepts and try to improve our civility and happiness in this world.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today, Mike. And I'm sure we will put all the links below the video and the audio when it comes out shortly. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for what you're doing, and I enjoyed being with you today.
Thank you.